Well, welcome and thank you, DJ B Diamond, for the excellent soundtrack to start our 2-day road trip. We look forward to hearing your playlist throughout our journey together. And thank you all for joining us for this third annual SIP Inclusion Conference. I'm Kristen Brooks, Assistant Superintendent, Student Programs and Services, and the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project out of Riverside County Office of Education. On behalf of Kevin Schaefer, Director of Inclusive Practices, and the entire SIP team, we would like to thank you all for attending this event and spending your time with us. The theme of this year's conference is Driving Inclusion Forward, Shifting Beliefs into Action. The theme illustrates the SIP belief that we are in the driver's seat to move inclusion forward, regardless of where we sit in the organization. The SIP vision is to innovate, include, and impact. Along with including crew members like you, we can and will make this vision a reality. Our team would like to thank the Riverside and El Dorado County Offices of Education for their continued support of our project. A special thank you to the California Department of Education, Special Education Division, for continuing to fund projects like this and events like this so that we can continue to innovate and impact the lives of students, educators, and community partners throughout the state. Because we want this event to be inclusive for all, we would like to remind you that this year's conference platform offers many embedded accessibility features that you can customize to meet your individual needs. To access these features, click on the blue icon on the top right of your screen. We also want to highlight a new feature this year, the Conference Leaderboard. By attending sessions, visiting exhibit booths, and taking advantage of networking opportunities, you can earn points to improve your ranking. Attendees who are at the top of the leaderboard at the end of the event will have a chance to win free registrations to the July 2024 MTSS Professional Learning Institute in Anaheim or the October 2024 CalXC Symposium in San Diego. We've enabled closed captioning and ASL interpretation and Spanish translation are available in each of your sessions. If you have any concerns, please stop by the information desk or select the help button to get your questions answered. And with that, let's get to the conference. I'd like to introduce an incomparable author, advocate, and public speaker as our first keynote speaker. Jonathan Mooney's work has been featured in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, USA Today, HBO, NPR, ABC News, New York Magazine, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe. He has spoken in all 50 states and 8 countries on disability and neurodiversity rights and inclusion, inspiring those who live with differences and advocating for change. He's a graduate of Brown University and has published 3 books, The Short Bus, Learning Outside the Lines, and Normal Sucks. Please get set at the starting line to begin your journey with Jonathan Mooney.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Jonathan, and hey, I'm just so honored and grateful to be spending some time with y'all today. Now, before I do my thing, I have a few pieces of housekeeping, if you'll bear with me. First and foremost, I want to challenge and welcome everyone who's participating today to participate in whatever way, whatever modality is right for you. You know, I know some of us have a hard time sitting still. I know that's true for me. So if you need to be multitasking on this webinar this morning, no problem. You need to be walking around your room or your office, that's cool. I myself may wander off in the middle of my presentation. And you all will be inclusive and accommodating of that, I'm sure. But in all seriousness, as the saying goes, there's as many ways to learn as there are human beings on this virtual gathering this morning. So you do you. Okay, second piece of housekeeping. I got to give a big old shout out to the folks behind the scenes who made this gathering happen. The folks at the Riverside Office of Education behind supporting inclusive practices. You know, let's be honest, putting on a conference is a hard thing to do. Putting on a virtual convening is a big old pain in the ass. And these folks have done it with the highest level of professionalism and deep commitment to supporting education, not just for some students, but for all students. And so I want to ask you all to recognize their hard work and their principled commitment to inclusion. Send them some clapping hands emojis, some fireworks. In whatever way is right for you, let's find a way to recognize the important work of the people who made this gathering happen. Okay, with all that said and done, let me get right to it. I'm here today with y'all to talk about how we can do right and how we can do better by young folks who experience disability and neurodivergence. And I'll be honest with you, this is a deeply personal conversation for me. It's a personal conversation because I struggled in school and beyond because of my own neurodiversities. You know, I was the kid who had a really hard time sitting still in class. So I spent a lot of the day chilling out with the janitor in the hallway. I was the kid who, surprise, surprise, had a hard time keeping his mouth shut. So I grew up on a first name basis with Shirley, the receptionist in the principal's office. And I was also the kid who had a terrible time with reading. And specifically, I had a torturous time reading out loud. So I spent a lot of my education hiding in the bathroom to escape reading out loud with tears streaming down my face. I didn't learn to read until I was 12 years old. Growing up, I had every label you could imagine. I was called the bad kid. I was called the lazy kid. I was called the at-risk kid. And then eventually I became the special ed kid. I was diagnosed with a continuum of language-based learning disabilities, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and others when I was 9. I was diagnosed with a whole bunch of executive functioning and behavioral problems, ADHD and others, when I was 10. And I ended up dropping out of school for about a year when I was 12. That year, 6th grade, I struggled with a number of mental health challenges. I struggled with anxiety. I struggled with depression. And I had a plan for suicide. And what brought me to that place was the general message I was getting that my differences made me deficient as a human being. And what brought me to that place was the experience of marginalization in traditional classrooms because of these differences. You know, when I got back into school, middle school and beyond, there were all sorts of low expectations that surrounded me. You know, I heard it all. You know, I was told by my dad that I would most likely be a high school dropout. That's what my dad thought. I was told by a counselor that I'd probably end up unemployed, never have a job. And then I was told one day in high school by a teacher that I'd probably end up in jail and incarcerated. So I'm here today with y'all in part to talk about a different path and share with you how I and others can transcend those low expectations. You know, in my life, those very hopeful prophecies did not come to pass. Opposed to being a high school dropout, as my father said, I became a college graduate. As you heard, I graduated from Brown University with an honors degree in, of all things, English literature. Opposed to being unemployed, I ended up writing books, 3 of them. The first of which I wrote as an undergraduate at Brown University when I was 21 years old. And most importantly, what I'm most proud of, opposed to becoming an inmate, I became an advocate, somebody who has dedicated his entire professional life, almost 25 years, trying to make the world a better place for folks who live and learn differently. So I'm here today to talk about what we can do. And when I say we, I mean all of us, because it is a all hands on deck moment to do right and do better by folks with brain and body differences. I want to share with you what I know in practice makes a difference for those of us who live and learn differently. So when I think about that question, like what can we do on the day-to-day to make theory or rhetoric or the belief of inclusion a reality in the life of young folks? There are three core actions I want to challenge us to take in whatever role we may play, whether that be a systems leader, whether that be a in front of kids every day, support specialist, parent, grandparent, and everything in between. Three things I know that we can do to move the dial and create a more just and equitable school system and society for folks who experience disability and neurodivergence. So with that in mind, well, let's get to it. Let me share these three things, okay? First and foremost, inclusion in action requires us to develop intentional strategies to support young folks with brain and body differences in developing a positive learning identity and sense of self. And I got to be real with y'all, that's hard work. It's hard work because so many young people with brain and body differences get the message from multiple different facets of our society that their differences make them deficient as human beings. I've been speaking with young folks who learn differently, live differently for 25 years. Gave my first talk almost 25 years ago when I was an undergraduate in college. And I remember after I gave that first talk, a kid came up to me and said, "Hey, Jonathan, why do you bother? We're the stupid, crazy, lazy kids." And those three words struck to my soul. Because if you would have asked me to describe myself to you when I was 12, when I was 18, when I was 20, I would have used some version of those same words. Stupid, crazy, lazy, broken, deficient. And unfortunately, y'all, I've heard some version of those words from young folks in all 50 states, in rural communities, urban communities, suburban communities, and everything in between. Young folks are saturated with the message that their differences make them deficient as human beings, and they develop the antithesis of a positive sense of self, a positive learning identity, and that is a negative or debased learning identity. So our work starts by challenging that and taking steps towards rebuilding a better sense of self for young folks with differences. And that work of rebuilding a positive learning identity, it requires us, first and foremost, to reframe who or what we call the problem. For most of human history, we've called normal good and right. And states of being that differ or deviate or diverge from the middle of the statistical bell curve, from the normal or average, get seen as deficient and wrong. The problem is put in the person. But the truth is, a whole constellation of human experiences, disabilities and neurodivergence that we have been made to think are the problem are in fact differences and not inherent deficiencies. And reframing that is our first step. So let's use my life experience as a way to illuminate that paradigm shift. Let's take this thing folks called my problem of ADD, right? Hang out with those words: attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder. Hunts the problem in me. Something's wrong with my brain. But the truth is, this cognitive state that folks called a deficit or a disorder was really a difference in the truest sense of the word. Now, it's a difference with neurobiologically based weaknesses. I'm not naive about that. Look, I struggle with executive functioning. I struggle with paying attention. I have the attention span of a gnat, right? I struggle with keeping track of things. You know, I have explored the feasibility of stapling my car keys to my forehead, right? So I get it. Those are very real challenges, limitations, weaknesses, deficits. Those are hard things. But what goes hand in hand with those challenges, limitations, are a whole bunch of good things that we don't talk enough about. Y'all know research shows that folks with executive functioning differences are often better problem solvers than the general population. Came across a research study recently that showed that EMTs, emergency medical professionals, firemen and women with ADD are better at their job than so-called normal EMTs. That makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, look, your house is on fire. You probably want that dude to have ADD, right? Forget sitting still. Come get my cat, you know? So it's a difference. It's got challenges. It's got good things about it. It is not, however, an inherent deficiency inside of the child. My problem wasn't ADD. My problem was the school desk. How in God's name can a school desk be a kid's problem? Well, let me immerse you for a moment into my relationship with the school desk, and it is a fraught relationship, right? This is my experience at the school desk. First grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, college, doesn't matter. 5 seconds in the class, my foot starts bouncing. 10 seconds in the class, both feet start bouncing. 20 seconds in the class, oh, I'm gonna bust out the drums, right? 10 minutes in the class, oh, it's over. I'm the kid trying to take his leg and put it behind his neck, right? And that young person is consistently shamed for that behavior. We have a set of institutional norms and practices that confuses or conflates being good with being compliant. The good kid sits still and raises their hand and keeps their mouth shut. And if you don't do that, well, something's wrong with you. You know, I got that message at home, at the dinner table with my dad every night. Jonathan, stop it, stop it, stop it. What's wrong with you? And I got that message in some of my classrooms. Not all of them, but some of them. I'll never forget. I had a teacher in 2nd grade named Mrs. C. Now, I've had many gifted, brilliant teachers in my life who I will celebrate with you today. Mrs. C is not one of those. My foot would be bouncing. She would stop class. She would point at me. All the kids would look at me, and she would say at the top of her lungs, Jonathan, what is your problem? We put the problem in the person. The kid internalizes being the problem kid. And then when I think I'm the problem kid or the bad kid, I say to myself, well, hey, if I'm the bad kid, I'm going to be the best bad kid you've ever seen. I'm going to run with that identity. That's a cycle that we can break. It's a cycle we can break by understanding the problem's not in the kid, but in the practices around the kid. My problem wasn't ADD. My problem was the passive learning environment, where on average kids spend about 70% of the day sitting still, passively receiving information. Problem was the confusion or conflation of good with being compliant. And ultimately, the problem was the shame of being called the bad kid in front of everybody. You know, let me give you a good example of that social stigma, because it happens to kids across the neurodivergent and disability continuum. They get identified publicly as the deficient kid. You know, I give a lot of talks to young folks. And back in the day, I gave a talk to third graders in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I walked in to give my talk. And when I walked into the room, in the back of the room, there were a set of boxes made out of bookshelves about 3 feet tall. So they took these bookshelves, they made a box about this big. And in one of the boxes, I could see a head bouncing up and down, right? It was one of the third graders in the box jumping. Now, that's not a sight you see every day. So I turned to the teacher, and with all due respect, I said, hey, man, what's up with the box, right? And the guy looked at me with a straight face, not a hint of irony. And he said to me, Jonathan, that's Jack. I said, you have a Jack in the box? Are you kidding me? They had put poor little Jack in the back of the room in a box. Now, I don't got to belabor this point, y'all. ADD ain't Jack's problem. The box is Jack's problem. Problem not in the person, but in the way the person's treated and the identity, sense of self that they're made to internalize. That's really the problem. And, you know, that's true for my learning differences too. You know, again, hang out with those words. Dyslexia, dysgraphia, learning disability, all of those words imply, explicitly state that something's wrong with my brain. But again, these cognitive states are not inherent deficiencies. They have neurobiologically based weaknesses. Don't get me wrong. I live those every single day. I struggle with spelling to this day. I spell at a third grade level. I struggle with reading to this day. My phonetic awareness is in the 12th percentile right now. I confuse words that look alike. You know, who and how look the same to me. Horse and house look the same to me. I swear to y'all, when I went away to college, I thought that Brown University offered a course in orgasmic chemistry. Imagine my disappointment on the first day of that class, right? So I get it. These are real challenges, but y'all know you live it every day. What comes with the real challenges are a whole bunch of real strengths, gifts, and talents that we don't talk enough about. We know empirically, more than ever now, that a whole constellation of creative capacities go hand in hand with a whole constellation of neurodiversities. Y'all know the kid that can't read, but they can draw. You know the kid that struggles with writing, but they can talk. So the problem's not in the person. Dyslexia, not my problem. My problem was being made to feel stupid because my brain diverged from what we consider normal. That's really my problem. And I'll tell you, I'm not the only one with that problem. We have a national crisis on our hands of young folks leaving school feeling dumb. And that crisis has an origin, and that origin is a narrow definition of what constitutes intelligence. We confuse being smart with being good at school. And if you're not good at school, a narrow band of academic tasks and a narrow band of academic content, you feel dumb. And not only do you feel dumb, but you often find yourself in one of the multiple dumb tracks. I'm sure y'all remember those in your own life. I know they weren't inherently malicious, but they were there, weren't they? I know in my life, there were the reading groups, right? Sure, some of y'all remember reading groups. Let me ask y'all a question about the reading groups. Was it ever hard to tell which reading group was the smart group and which reading group was the not smart group? Not hard to tell, right? You got the blackbirds over here. You got the bluebirds over here. And then over in the annexed trailer building, you got the sparrows, right? Oh, come on now. We ain't fooling anybody. Let me put it this way. When I was growing up, everybody knew that my group was the dumb group because my group was a bird that did not fly. It was an ostrich and it ran quickly, right? Come on now. Everybody knew that my group was the dumb group, and everybody knew that the California Condors was the smart group because my group was reading War and Peace, and the Condors were reading War and Peace, and I was reading See Spot Run, right? We're not fooling anybody. And the problem is, not only do I know, not only do kids like me know that they're in the dumb group, but who else knows? Everybody else knows, right? Some of the worst memories of my life were going over to the other side of the room to pick up my little book. And let's be honest, See Spot Run, not a bad book, right? Nice narrative structure, nice moral tale. But guess what? You don't want to be caught dead with Spot when you are 14 years old now, do you? Spot's going in my backpack, Spot's going in my shirt, because as I walk by all the other kids, I hear it. I hear, Jonathan, go back to your dumb reading group. Jonathan, go back to your stupid reading group. Jonathan, go back to your retarded reading group. A word that should be treated as the moral equivalent of a racial slur, but is often not. We all know, because we've all been acculturated, immersed in a narrow definition of which humans are the smart humans and the good humans and which ones are not. We all know what gets you in the smart group, and it is not your tactile kinesthetic intelligence. It ain't your social emotional IQ. It ain't your ability to talk, draw, create, connect, or care about other human beings. It's a narrow band of academic skills that we have privileged as the apex, the pinnacle of human flourishing as intelligence. And that narrow definition of intelligence leaves so many people out. And it wounds so many people deeply. And that narrow definition, that's the problem, not learning differently. So our work is to challenge that narrow definition of intelligence. Intelligence is not one thing, it is many things. It's not singular, it's multiple. Don't know about y'all, but in my life, some of the smartest people I've ever met didn't do school well, but they could rebuild the car engine from scratch. And that person is just as intelligent, just as valuable to society as that person with a 4.0 or with a PhD. So our work is to ask a different question about kids. The old school question is, how smart is that kid? Let's track it, let's measure it. Wrong question. The right question to ask every day about every kid is, how is that kid smart? Creating an environment, a relationship grounded in the idea that every single human being has a spark of genius inside of them. And our job is to find it and celebrate it. So the problem's not in the person. The problem is in the interaction between person and environment. The problem isn't dyslexia, ADD, autism, Down syndrome. The problem is stupid, crazy, lazy. An internalized different is deficient. And so our work is to challenge that every single day, to reframe who or what is the problem, to challenge those institutional practices that privilege some brains and bodies over others, and to shift a student's personal sense of who they are, because that informs deeply who they think they can become. But that's not the only thing that we need to do. The second thing I want to share with you flows logically and naturally from reframing the problem. Because when we think differently about folks who live and learn differently, we can act differently towards them. In my life, the acting differently, first and foremost, was my mom. So I want to tell you all about my mom real quick, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Colleen Mooney, right? Give you a mental image of my mom. You know, a lot of people underestimated her, right? She's quite a character. My mom, not a tall woman, on a good day, in high heels, on her tippy toes. My mom is 4'11", right? little Irish bulldog, you know. And my mom struggled in school. You know, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. My mom's parents were Irish immigrants who cleaned rich folks' homes in San Francisco. My mom struggled in school, never graduated from high school, didn't go to college. She had my brother and my two sisters all before she was 19, and found herself a single mom on public assistance. And a lot of people looked down on her for that. A lot of people dismissed her in her own life and then in her journey as an advocate for me. But I'll tell y'all something, you know, you dismissed my mom at your own peril, because my mom wasn't tall, she wasn't wealthy, she had a very high-pitched, squeaky voice like Minnie Mouse, and she cursed like a truck driver. And I'll tell you something, if you were a teacher or a principal or anybody doing wrong by me, you did not want cursing Minnie Mouse in your office. But that's where my mom was every single day when things were going wrong for me. My mom was in that office. How did we know she was in that office? Well, we knew she was in that office because every dog in the neighborhood was running away. Only bats could hear her high-pitched obscenities. Glass was shattering, right? My mom, well, she understood something. She understood that I didn't need somebody in my life to fix me. What I needed in my life was somebody to fight for my right to learn differently. That's what I needed. You know, my mom would say to anyone who would listen, she would say, if my son doesn't learn the way he's taught, well, teach the way he learns. Now, I'll be honest, that's a little bit of a paraphrase, because when my mom said it, there were a whole bunch of F-bombs that I left out, right? But nonetheless, that's what my mom was all about. Change the environment, not the person. You know, the history of disability policy, disability professions, has been problem in the person, fix the person. Make the square peg fit the round hole. The word rehabilitation, its Latin root is to restore to normality. That's informed our language, it's informed our textbooks, it's informed our training, it's informed our system. And the problem is, when a kid is fixed all the time, they feel broken. And when the square peg is made to fit the round hole, too much, too often, too hard, it eventually breaks. We're at a tipping point in our field, in our movement, because it is a movement where we have a chance to reject the fixing of people with neurodiversity and disability and replace that entire paradigm with a commitment to changing the environment around the learner, around the person. Now, we've done good work on that as a community by advancing the notion of accommodation in partnership with remediation, not either or, but both. And I want to be clear, in my own journey and in all of the literature that looks at what makes success academically for folks with different brains and bodies, accommodating, not remediating, is at the center of that journey of change. It was for me. You know, I had a professor at Brown University who told me that I could use books on tape. That's what it was back in my day, right? Thing was so big, you had to put it into a backpack and plug it into a generator, right? And then you had Stephen Hawking in your ear all day long, you know? But that mattered for me. Accommodate, not remediate. Nowadays, we got the world's literature and libraries in our pockets on our phones, and the research is clear. Listening builds comparable cognitive skills to reading. And when a student listens in partnership with direct instruction on reading, both skill sets improve. Accommodate, not remediate. You know, I'm here with you because I had accommodations around writing. You know, I'll never forget a teacher in third grade, you know, empowered me to think differently about writing. You know, if you're a kid like me and you're asked to write something in class, it's terrifying, you know, because there'll always be mistakes, whether they're spell check or not. When I was a kid, I kid you not, I would only write sentences or paragraphs in class with the words that I could find on posters in the room, because I didn't want to make mistakes. And if I couldn't figure out how to write a sentence or a paragraph with the words on the DARE poster in the back of the room, I would scribble it. So nobody knew I couldn't spell, but then everyone thought I was dumb. I thought I was dumb, and I was in a dumb it down cycle that was broken by a teacher who said, Jonathan, why don't you talk out your ideas? I said, you can do that? Isn't that cheating? This teacher said, what are you talking about? That's what human beings have been doing since the beginning of time, talking out their ideas. A moment of accommodation, not remediation. So let's be advocates, champions for that notion of not fixing the person, but accommodating neurodivergence by changing the environment around the person. But I want to challenge us because I think we're at an inflection point as a movement to go beyond accommodation for some, which is the system we have right now. Because when we accommodate only those with diagnoses, it reinforces somehow this idea that these are deficiencies inside the person, exceptions. This is good, this is different and wrong. We should be advocates for the idea of accommodation for all. Because the truth is, the only normal learner is a learner you don't know very well. Learning diversity constitutes the human experience. Accommodation for all is a radical idea that embraces the truth that we're all on a continuum of learning diversity and neurodivergence. And the system needs to address that, recognize that. But honestly, the next wave of our movement is to go beyond the language of accommodation, because the word accommodation has a negative connotation to it, does it not? It's kind of like that word tolerance, right? We tolerate something we're not that happy about, you know? Let me put it this way. When I was a kid, people talked a lot about accommodation and tolerating difference, and it implied that difference was bad. You know, in my adult life now, when my mother-in-law comes to visit, I don't celebrate her visit. I accommodate her visit, right? So let's go beyond accommodating the notion of accommodation to universal design of instruction. A framework, a way of thinking, a way of doing, rooted in the notion that the question we should always ask ourselves is, who is left out? Who's left out from the experience that we've created? The learning environment, the working environment, the community engagement, and what modalities can expand the circle of belonging. Universal design of instruction is the future of our work, our movement. It's the future of building an education system that doesn't just work for some learners, but ultimately works for all. Okay, I got one more for y'all, right? Before I call it a morning. I told you there are 3 things I wanted to share with you. 1, rebuild those damaged learning identities by reframing who or what is the problem. 2, let's not fix people. Let's commit to transforming the environment, being advocates for accommodation for all, and ultimately champions of universal design of instruction. And last but not least, it's an all hands on deck moment for us as a community to challenge the deficit model that surrounds and constrains so many young people. You know, if you're a kid that doesn't fit school, you hear a lot about what's wrong with you. You know I did. Jonathan can't spell. Jonathan can't sit still. Jonathan can't read. Jonathan can't. A deficit model. And that deficit model is institutionalized in many of our processes and procedures. Look at the IEP, a good example of an institutionalized deficit model. I'm sure y'all know the IEP better than most people. For those that don't, the Individualized Education Plan, IEP, you got to be real about that thing. NSA, KGB got nothing on the IEP, right? They've been doing deep intel on me my whole life, flying unmanned drone missions over my house. And it ain't good news in that file. You know, the research is clear. For every 1 strength mentioned in IEPs, 504s, response to intervention, neuropsych evals, and everything in between, for every 1 strength that's mentioned, there's upwards of 25 or more deficits, disorders, and weaknesses. Imagine that being your life. Imagine hearing all about what was wrong with you. A deficit model. It's got to be challenged. We got to flip that script, because if we do, it can change people's lives. I know the power of having the deficit model challenged in my own life. I'll never forget, I had a teacher in third grade named Mr. R. And Mr. R, let me tell you, this man, he was on a mission, on a mission to find the good in every single kid. That's what he believed was the purpose of education, not disseminating facts and figures, not just building basic skills, but finding the good in every kid. And most importantly, helping them find it in themselves. So he would ask every kid every day, hey, what are you good at? What do you like? What do you love? And he would ask me those questions. And because I was in IEP land, my answer to him would be, Mr. R, I ain't good at anything. Nothing. I'm not good at anything. That's what I believed. I believed that I had nothing to contribute. But the thing is, Mr. R, he never gave up. Nuh-uh. And one day he came to me and he said, Jonathan, you are wrong about yourself. And you know what? I think a bunch of the teachers are wrong about you. I've been watching you, and you are so good at telling stories. Now, sometimes they're inappropriate stories you tell, but I don't care. You are so good at telling stories that you could be a writer. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me before in my entire life. I was in special education for dyslexia. I looked at the guy and I said, Mr. R, you think I could be a writer? Are you out of your goddamn mind? I can't spell, man. And Mr. R looked right at me and he said, Jonathan, in my class, screw spelling. Screw spelling, man. Yeah. You should have seen me jump out of my body, because for the first time in my life, somebody said, forget what you can't do and focus on what you can do. And that's my challenge to you. My challenge at the conclusion of my time with you is to be a Mr., a Mrs., a Ms. R in the life of somebody who believes they have nothing to contribute. Because we know human beings survive and thrive when they have somebody in their corner who believes in their potential. And it's an all hands on deck moment right now to unleash the talents of this generation, because we know that neurodivergent and disabled students have strengths, gifts, and talents, not despite their differences, but because of them. The next innovator is the kid in the hallway. The next artist is chilling out with the janitor right now. The next CEO of a social venture that will solve our critical problems is hiding in the bathroom. And you can change that. You can celebrate every single human being's right to be different. So thank you all, obviously, so much for the opportunity to be with you. But more importantly, thank you for the important and critical work you do every single day. Have a wonderful conference.
Wow, Jonathan, thank you so much. That was fantastic. You have set the stage for our conference in a major way. Thank you for your vulnerability, your authenticity, and your inspiration for us all to drive this work forward. You were spot on when you said it's all hands on deck. So I hope everybody heard that. So many good takeaways, and I just want to share a couple before we go to break. There is a narrow definition of what SMART is. We confuse smart with being good at school, and we need to ask, how is that student smart, and then find it and celebrate it. The problem isn't the person, and the differences are not deficiencies. Teach the way students learn, and don't be a Mrs. C, but do be a Mr. R. Because when a student gets sent to be fixed all the time, they feel broken. We tolerate what we aren't happy about. And you'll hear our team say many times we need to move away from tolerance and toward value add. So just so many powerful messages. Thank you for being an inclusion accomplice alongside of us. We are grateful to have your time this morning in our kickoff. So next, we have scheduled a short break, so take care of your personal needs while listening to the jam and live sounds of DJ B Diamond, followed by our first round of breakout sessions. And don't forget to keep your eyes on the leaderboard. We hope you'll be able to stay with us for the day, but if you can't join us for the breakout sessions and only have a few minutes to spare, we've designed short on-demand videos for you, so check them out in the on-demand tab of the conference agenda. This conference has been designed with many access points, so please explore our conference platform to get the most out of this experience. See you in breakout sessions.